Good morning, everybody. It's 2 minutes past 11. We're going to make a start. Going to begin with a little bit of housekeeping. I think as you joined, you will have been presented with some information just to confirm that this webinar is being recorded. I'm just confirming that now for you. There won't be any chat functionality available, but any questions you have can be asked in the Q&A box whilst we're giving the initial presentation. At the end, we're going to hold a verbal Q&A session. Please raise your hand and the host will bring you in. At the end of the webinar, and this is going to be really important, and you're going to hear this a couple of times during this session today, you're going to be invited to fill in a feedback questionnaire. That'll happen during this webinar, but also we're going to be following up with an email to you all afterwards as well, and strongly encourage you to fill that in, and we'll explain a little bit further as we go along. Next slide, please, Carol. So I'm Steve Keyworth, co-founder and director of Environment Systems. I'm going to begin this morning's webinar with an introduction to PeatSCOPE and to set out a little bit as to one of the key reasons we're holding this webinar today. I'm then going to pass you over to Steve Mann from the Scottish Government, who's going to give us the policy context as to how PeatSCOPE came about and why it is needed. We're then going to pass over to Katie Metcalf, who's going to talk to us about the data that sits behind PeatSCOPE and the data that really sits at the heart of the portal. We're then going to pass on to Karen, who's going to deliver us a demonstration of the portal. And we're going to finish off with a question and answer session before closing at midday. Next slide, please, Karen. So let's make a start. PeatSCOPE will be supporting Scotland's transition to net zero, landowners to become more sustainable stewards, and for private investors to identify more green investment opportunities. PeatSCOPE is an online tool designed to help you understand the peat resource in your region of interest and to provide you with the relevant data to help in the planning, designing, and management of peatland restoration. Next slide, please, Karen. So where has PeatSCOPE come from? PeatSCOPE came about as part of the CivTech Challenge about a year ago, where Scottish Government supported Environment Systems' vision to develop PeatSCOPE. And it was developed in response to the question, how can technology help us identify peatland restoration sites that will optimize costs and benefits? Specifically with the goal of addressing 4 key points. And these 4 key points are how to identify which areas of degraded peatland will deliver the greatest public benefits, that's both carbon and co-benefits, how to make peatland restoration more efficient, targeted and cost-effective, how to attract private finance to peatland restoration, and finally, how to promote the value of peatland restoration to land managers and other stakeholders. Now, this next bit, in terms of one of the key reasons we're here today, is really important. This is a very time-bound exercise. With access to PeatSCOPE currently free and open at the point of use until the end of March. Prior to the end of March, we, that is all of us here and the wider peatland restoration community, need to make a decision about how we want to continue with PeatSCOPE access. Someone has to pay to maintain, support, and update it. And we have two options. Option one, do we want to keep it as open and free access at the point of use to maximise its use for the purpose of peatland restoration for the public good, i.e. make the case for Scottish Government core funding for it? Or option two, do we put up a paywall and make the market, and the market would include government users, pay for access to PeatSCOPE as required? So do we look for core funding, keep it free and open at the point of use, or does everyone effectively pay as you go? So the purpose of today's webinar is to launch the tool. It's been available for a little while now, but this is the official launch of it, and to raise awareness of PeatSCOPE to the wider peatland community. And secondly, we want to gather your feedback on the value of PeatSCOPE to you. Back to the survey I've already mentioned, and we're going to hear about it again. And we're going to be following up with many of you in the coming month, and we'd welcome you to contact us as well with any of your thoughts on the value of PeatSCOPE to what you're doing for peatland restoration in Scotland. I'm going to hand over to Steve Mann now from the Scottish Government.
Hi folks, Steve Mann here, I'm from the peatland restoration team within the Environment and Forestry Directorate at the Scottish Government. So just got a couple of slides to go through and set a bit of the context, the wider policy context of why we launched the CivTech Challenge, why we're doing peatland restoration. So basically what we're doing here is trying to address the climate and nature emergencies. In Scotland, peat accounts for about 25% of all Scotland's area. Of that, about 75% of it's degraded, and that degraded peat results in about 15% of Scotland's net greenhouse gas emissions. But in good condition, peatlands actually can store carbon, and they have a great deal of additional co-benefits, such as supporting biodiversity, reducing flood risks, water management. You can help with water treatment. There's a great deal of additional co-benefits to peat. So it seems like a very smart solution to try and reduce some of that those net emissions. So the Scottish Government in 2020 committed 250 million to restore 250,000 hectares of peatland by 2030. To date, we've done about 65,000 hectares. That target, the 250 hectares, the 250 million, was informed by the Climate Change Committee. Karen, if you could just move on to the next slide, please. But yeah, as I said, we've done 65,000 so far, and the current sort of rate at which we're restoring isn't really matching up to be able to do that target. So what we basically need to do is we need to increase the restoration rates in Scotland to try and meet those targets. We have been upscaling. It's not been quick enough. There are many factors that have been contributing to this. But basically what we're looking for is new solutions, new delivery models to try and really upscale the level of restoration that we have in Scotland. So that's why we went to CivTech and launched that CivTech Challenge, which Steve mentioned earlier, which resulted in PeatSCOPE. Karen, if you could just go on to the next slide, please. But yeah, so very quick, but that's the wider sort of policy context. We've committed 250 million to try and restore 250,000 hectares. We went through this CivTech Challenge. Environment Systems have helped to work to develop PeatSCOPE. And now what we're doing basically is trying to engage with everybody across the kind of the restoration community, the sector, to try and help us determine PeatSCOPE's role and the Scottish Government's role moving forward. And again, if you could please provide feedback at the end. As Steve mentioned, there will be a survey at the end, but also if you could provide any additional feedback, that would be brilliant. And I think I'll just hand over to Katie now.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So I'm Katie Medcoff. I'm Environment Director at Environment Systems and one of the team helping to develop this. I was leading from the environmental and peat knowledge. And PeatSCOPE's been developed using existing and new data sources put together to provide information important to the restoration process, necessary for applying to peatland code as part of a registered scheme. So this portal allows you to view the information and analysis areas, understanding key factors and knowledge about that area, such as the code benefits, which Stephen's just introduced, and accessibility, and enable you to make a first stage decision about peatland restoration. The outcome of PeatSCOPE is to get a broad understanding of how much peat, the likely condition, and the associated factors, so that you can begin the detailed analysis and work in the field necessary to draw up the site map and to apply for peatland code, and then claim your carbon credits. Thank you, Karen. Next slide. So a number of layers underpin it, and this was the first layer. This is the peatland depth layer, and the main point of this layer was to separate peatland from mineral soil. This particular layer is based on the peatland depth codes within Peatland Code 1.6, as that was the code relevant when we were developing it. It was done in conjunction with data layers from James Hutton Institute and Peatland Action, and we're very grateful to both of those for helping us with the data. However, we did receive some problems, mainly in the northwest, and it was the rocky outcrops down the northwest where we get that very difficult terrain where you have rocky outcrop, peat bog, cool, peat bog, rocky outcrop, and we did some further analysis to remove those rocky outcrops. And we have a new layer conforming to the depth in Peat Code 2.0, which will increase the extent of eligible peat, but we're waiting to implement that if and how we decide to move PeatSCOPE forward. So please do fill in the questionnaire. Next slide, please. Peatland condition. This layer gives an indication of land that's eligible for restoration under Peatland Code 1.2. We could not map all the classes separately, as the drained hagged and drained artificial couldn't actually be separated. That was because the data has a resolution of 10 meters. So small linear features such as drains are not readily identified. Rather, it's the appearance of drained peats or hags and gullies that are used to identify the class. The data was modelled using algorithms based on existing data sets and a Sentinel-2 satellite imagery time series. The biggest issue we faced is that Scotland's peat does not have a standard appearance from north to south. In different parts of the country, the peat has significantly different species compositions and phenotypic appearance. And we had to split Scotland into approximately 16 biogeographical zones and apply the scientific rule base, which we developed separately in each zone. And it's the major caveat of this is that this is an estimate of peat condition. As you'll know, peat is a really complex three-dimensional substrate. And if you're going to go forward to peatland restoration scheme, it's essential to check the depth and condition through field measurements in order to obtain the detail necessary for the grants and for making your restoration scheme successful. there are always things like hidden drains, which are overlain by vegetation that you only find when you're actually out on the ground with a peat probe. Thank you, Karen. Next slide. As well as benefiting carbon capture, restoring and wetland carbon has other benefits. Scottish Government needed us to consider these code benefits, as in some areas restoring peat will help with flood mitigations. This is particularly where the restoration is above towns and villages that often flood out. In other restoration of peat, it will mean many less organic matter particles in the water, helping water quality. And this was modelled by considering where eroding peatland had a high hydrological connectivity to the streams and rivers. The biodiversity metric is at the moment extremely simple because restoration will always benefit biodiversity. But this shows where it will greatly enhance protected areas, which are important under our commitments to the 30 by 30 protection goals from COP15. Carbon abatement considers the amount of depth of peat that can be restored in an area. Thank you, Karen. We held over 30 meetings and workshops with different groups of users while we were developing PeatSCOPE. And one thing that was very important to the peatland contractors and restoration advisor was the need to consider issues that would make the project more challenging and expensive. For this first version of PeatSCOPE, we've added 3 very simple layers: snow lie until April, altitude, where a 600-metre cutoff is shown. Generally above 600 metres, it's more demanding to restore. And then slope, where land above 6 degrees takes a higher degree of intervention, but also it needs to be evaluated for the danger of peat slides. So I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague, Karen, who's going to demonstrate the portal for you.
Thank you, Katie. Good morning, everyone. My name's Karen Pugh. I'm the product owner of PeatSCOPE at Environment Systems. I've overseen its development from its sort of conception in the SIDTech process to today's launch webinar. Probably the main point of contact, you might have seen me emailing you. Those of you who are users on PeatSCOPE, I've sort of allowed you access. So PeatSCOPE, it's an innovative tool to allow you to quickly scope, hence the sort of name PeatSCOPE, and plan peatland restoration projects at the moment, specifically in Scotland. So today I'm going to give you a very quick demonstration of the PeatSCOPE interface and show you in 3 sort of simple steps how you can use your own area of interest to assess the peatland of interest to a site that you're interested in. So without further ado, let's sort of dive into the features. Okay, so first off, let's just take a quick look at the user interface. As you can see, it's quite a clean, intuitive, user-friendly interface. We've focused on providing a sort of a seamless experience for our users with easy navigation, and it's also very quick. So this is the national data sets we're talking about, so they are very large, cumbersome data sets, but the way we've designed the portal, it allows you to very quickly zoom in and out. So just to go through sort of the layout, we've got a map window here on the right-hand side. There's a few features here. We've got 3 different types of base maps, so OpenStreetMap, dark and light. We've also got an aerial imagery, which is provided by Mapbox. So that's quite most up-to-date aerial imagery base layer available. So we've also got on this page sort of a help drop down here, which sort of gives you a bit more information on the layers Katie has just talked through. And also down in the bottom corner here, we have acknowledgements. So when you turn on different data layers, the source data sets are referenced in the bottom corner here. It's quite subtle, but it's a key point because one of the things we find a lot of the users are interested in is where the data's come from. So and one further thing on the map, we have actually locked it, the zoom extent, to 10 kilometer squares. So we're dealing with 10 meter pixels, as Katie said, in the data layers, and we don't want people to zoom all the way in to individual pixels. We want to try and keep it at that sort of 10 kilometer scale. Okay, so then if we go on to the left-hand side here, we've got what we call the data column. This is where all the data or map data is held. So we have perspectives. Within perspectives, we have what we call raster layers or map layers. Again, these are all typically based on 10 meter pixels. And you can just click these on and off, and then they will populate the map on the right-hand side. We've got a number of different perspectives and images nested within them. So I will go through these a bit later on. And then further down the column, we have what we call areas of interest. So these are basically where all the vector data sets are kept. And these are typically your land boundaries. And we've put in a number of stock boundaries that we think the peatland community would be interested in, things like protected sites. You turn these on and off. National data sets like administrative boundaries. We've got some peatland action data sets, land ownership. Any data sets that are available really that show a boundary, and that boundary allows you to query the areas based on the perspectives. So for a given boundary, you can work out the extent of peat depth and the condition categories within that boundary. And then finally, in this column, we've got your areas here, which are your areas of interest. So that allows you to upload any spatial data sets that you might have that you're specifically interested in, and they are just only visible to your user account. And you can upload an individual site, or you can upload multiple sites, which will then allow you to compare. So to quickly give you a demonstration of how you might use PeatSCOPE. Oh, sorry, I've missed one column. So I've failed to mention we've got this central column here, which provides the statistics. So these are dynamic statistics based on what you have got selected. So at the moment, I've got nothing selected, so we're just looking at the whole of Scotland. And I've got the peat depth layer selected, so it's just giving you statistics for the peat depth categories across Scotland. But if you start clicking on areas of interest, this dynamically updates based on what you have selected in this area of interest section. We then have also dynamic graphs and charts, which update depending on what you're looking at. We've got a summary section here, again, which summarizes the perspectives that you have selected. And then the final feature is this export layer stats. So as well as having the stats dynamically show here in this green box, you can export the stats, and that exports whatever you have selected out to a spreadsheet, and that gives you the exact areas of, if you're looking at peatland extent or peatland condition, it gives you the areas in hectares. So to go through how you might use it in 3 very simple steps, you'd use the upload function to bring in your own area of interest. So you click this, and then you would upload your typically shape files or geo packages, and then they become visible in the portal. So I've used a hypothetical boundary. So I've uploaded this this morning, and you can see the boundary is here, and it's next to Loch Patak. So when I can zoom in, and I can start then clicking through the perspectives. So you can look at the peat depth for that boundary, and then if I've got it clicked on, you can see there's 1,324 hectares of deep peat in that boundary. And if I wanted to export that as a Excel spreadsheet, just click at Export Feature Stats, and then it would appear in your downloads instantly, the breakdown of the peatland peat depth classes for that site. And that continues then through this list of perspectives. So we can look at condition again. So we've got the condition categories mapped to peatland code version 1.6, I think it is. And you can see here the dynamic chart for the area I'm looking at has updated with the peat depth, and also the breakdown of the peatland condition classes. So we've got sort of quite a lot of actively eroding bare peat and hag and gullies, drained hag or drained artificial, and a little bit of modified undrained bog. So there's quite a lot. That site has quite a lot of scope for peatland restoration. So then we can use the data from this the summary to drive further statistics, such as the cost of restoration for that site, using the area-based statistics driven from the categories, and plugging in some average costs of restoration for those specific condition categories. So yeah, as you can see, it's estimated from the mapping that it'll cost 1.7 million if you were to try and restore that entire site. And so a similar concept for the cost of restoration. We've also plugged in emission factors based on each condition class, and again that gives you an idea of the tons of carbon per hectare of that specific site. So sort of moving away from the condition, we've got a number of other layers here, things like forestry, not so relevant for this site. Agriculture, you can see there's 14 hectares of grassland within the site, and then we have accessibility. So for this site, the majority of the site has been classified as having few access issues, and that's driven by a number of factors. But the site is quite well accessed via tracks, and slope is, if I go on to slope is the majority of it is less than 6 degrees for this site. So the overall accessibility score is that it has few access issues. So in theory, it is a good site for restoration because the access is deemed to be relatively easy. So we have a few layers nested in under accessibility that help drive that score, as Katie mentioned earlier. We have things like altitude, so you can see the majority of it is below 500 meters. We have the snow lie. Again, there's not doesn't suffer from any snow lie problems. Slope, which I've touched on, majority of it is less than 6 degrees. And that all those come together to help sort of understand the accessibility of that site. So then if we move on to, excuse me, the co-benefits for the site. So Katie mentioned on her slide of all the co-benefits of doing peatland restoration. We've got a layer for each natural flood management, risk to water quality, biodiversity, and carbon abatement. We try to weight the different co-benefit layers using this sort of spider diagram. So you can see if you were to do peatland restoration on this site, it would have large benefits for carbon abatement, but less so for natural flood management. And that's predominantly because there's no real settlements sort of downstream of the peatland. And so that's able to give you a very quick overview of the co-benefits for restoring that specific site. So I've touched on cost of restoration. So I've got a little bit more time, so I'll just go into more of the national view. So I've sort of focused here on a very localized example. We have sort of national data sets here. So I could look at sort of local authority level. Just to give you a feel for the dynamic, very quick sort of updating. You can click on different areas and see the statistics for, so that's for the whole of the Highlands, estimated 1.2 million hectares of peat over 50 centimetres. And you can see very rapidly see these stats for the condition categories for the whole of Scotland, not just your individual sites. And again, that's the same, that rings true for all of these categories here. So that's almost the sort of the end of the demo. One or two other quick features I can show you in terms of areas of interest that we have here. We do have a hexagonal grid right across Scotland, and you're able to use this colour polygons by to sort of see, sort of highlight where all the actively eroding peat is, and it's a bit of a spotter, if you like. Gives you heat maps of where certain categories, condition categories are within Scotland. Okay, so I think that's sort of brings my demonstration to a close. I'm happy to open it up to questions from the floor.
Caron, thank you so much for that. I've been monitoring the Q&A window, so we will kick off with responding to those initially, and then please do raise your hand or put further questions in the Q&A if you've got any additional questions. So a question from Abby: are all the data layers that have been used open for commercial use? If not, how have you managed / got around this? So all data in PeatSCOPE is open data, or where there is a license required for it, a more restrictive license, then we have that license in place. So yeah, the focus of PeatSCOPE has been to use readily accessible data and the best data available from the community that is nationally consistent. Okay, and then we've been able to we've had a couple of data sets where we've then needed to license in for its use. I'm just looking at the rest of the panelists there. If I'll happily answer these where I can. If you think I've got it wrong or can add to it, please do feel free to jump in. So Abby, I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, please post again. So question from Thomas. I've logged into the portal and all I can see is the peat extent. All other layers say I need to upgrade. I also don't have any areas of interest listed.
I can take that one, Steve.
Karen, that'd be great. Thank you.
So, hi, Thomas. I'm not sure when you registered. If you registered just before the webinar, I probably haven't got to my emails. So the way the registration works is anyone can register for PeatSCOPE, and they will get what you see, just access to the peat extent layer. When you do register, I then get an email and it tells me sort of your where you come from, sort of, and then I will then basically grant you access to full to all the layers essentially, and that's what's happened with everyone that's registered for PeatSCOPE. There's a little section where I basically evaluate you, and then I generally give everyone access. But it's just a bit of allows us to control who is seeing the site. So I assume you registered just before the webinar. I will get to your request, your email after the webinar, grant you access, and then you should be able to upload your own data. If not, you can give me a message. Okay.
Thanks for that, Carol. It's just a way of us while it's free and open, just a way of us controlling being spammed to make sure that the site doesn't get hammered. Okay, question from Lucy. Could the co-benefits be automatically exported onto UK Land Carbon Registry once the site has been verified with PC? So I'm happy to start that one. It won't be automatically exported because it's not in a database schema sense set up to go straight across, but you can certainly download all the co-benefits data and then transfer it. And that's a potential, what we call a backlog feature request, that if that becomes critical in terms of that automatic exporting, then we're certainly happy to look at that, and getting that feedback in terms of how people are using the portal is super helpful for us. So you can certainly take the co-benefits data out, export it, and move it across, but it almost certainly won't happen automatically.
I'll just, if I can add to that one quickly, you can't export the perspective layers, so you can't export pixels essentially from the portal at the moment. All the data layers are locked within the portal, but you can export the statistics.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Next question is from David. How does the cost of peatland restoration get calculated? Karen, could you bring up the portal again maybe and just show the cost calculation screen?
Yeah, sure.
And then we can just describe that.
Okay, so as I touched on in the demonstration, the site is sort of classified into the 5 peatland condition categories. And then if down here in the cost of restoration, there's been a number of publications. I've referenced Klaus Glenk here, 2021. I think these numbers possibly could well be updated, but they're driven purely on area of the condition category. So everything within this area of interest that has been classified as actively eroding, we take the area of the actively eroding and basically simply multiply it by this multiplication factor of per hectare. So here it's estimated to be £2,091.50. So we basically just multiply that by the area to give us estimated cost of restoration. And that's a similar concept for emissions. They're just multiplication factors based on area.
Thanks, Carol. I think we've got a couple of associated questions that will come. I think we're going to keep going through them in order, so I'll make sure I capture them all. But we might just got a couple of ones that are on a similar topic, actually. So we may come back to that in a bit more detail in a moment. So next question from Jack. I missed the part where Carol drew the boundary line. How do we draw a boundary? Do we just put a shapefile of our project outline? Carol, are you happy to take that one?
Yeah, thank you, Jack. Yeah, I think drawing boundaries on here would be a great feature to have. It's definitely one that's in our backlog. But at the moment, we're expecting the users to be able to draw their boundary lines or have pre-existing boundary lines as shapefiles, which would be drawn in sort of a GIS package outside of PeatSCOPE, and you simply would just upload those via the upload function down here. So you just upload your shapefile. I think it has to be zipped, and then your shapefile then appears in your areas list, and then it's in the portal. And the portal accepts a wide variety of spatial data sets. So hopefully that answers your question. If you require any assistance with drawing a boundary in the GIS, then feel free to get in touch with me, and I can sort of help that process if you want a quick demo of your area. Happy to help there. I think that hopefully that answers. Yeah.
Thanks, Carol. No, great, thank you. So I'm going to keep moving us through because we've got quite a few questions coming. A question from a different Jack. What data set is used for peatland assessment units? I'm looking across the panel here. I'm not quite sure I know the answer to that. What data set is used for peatland assessment units? I think you can pick.
Yeah, so I mean, if I've understood correctly, you'd use peatland condition layer and peatland depth layer, so the top two, to quantify the amount of eligible peat for your site and eligible condition categories. Because I believe it's only the top three here, so actively eroding bare peat, actively eroding hag gully, drained hag gully, I think modified drained and bog as well, sorry. The top four there are eligible for peatland code. So that's how I would answer that question. Jack, feel free to come back if that's not answered it.
Thanks, Carol. Question from Javier, is the cost based only on condition class from peatland code, or does it take into account other things like accessibility?
Yeah, I can take that one again. It's all based on the peatland code. We haven't quantified the costs based on accessibility, but that is a good one to consider. And that, for advisors, contractors, I think that'd be a good one. I'd welcome your sort of feedback on how we might cost, how we might go about costing that, because we've obviously used for cost of restoration pre-existing literature based on Klaus's work. If you have any literature that helps us quantify distance to tracks and things like that, be all ears. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Question from Georgia, is there a process for updating input data if new evidence becomes available? Very happy to take that one. Yes, there is. The plan going, it was Katie said in her part of the session, we even have a peatland code condition version 2 available to go into the system. We have an aspiration to annually update the changing data sets in PeatSCOPE, but of course all that depends on the original question that I set out in my part of the talk is, what's the operating model going forward? Are we looking at sort of the core funding, or are we looking as effectively as a pay-as-you-go? So I think, so the simple answer is yes, we can update all the data layers, and we certainly have some ready to go and be updated, but we've got to look at that longer term model. Okay, Sarah, question from Sarah. There is a statement associated with the cost for restoration functionality stating that costs are higher now than listed. Will the cost be updated to keep them current, or they stay as shown in the reference? So should I take that one?
Yeah, I can take it as well.
Go for it then. Go on.
Yeah, so we've not really done any updates to the platform, because the platform basically finished in March 2023. So we were using the data available at the time, and we've kind of purposely not done any updates in the meantime. But I'm aware that there are updates to the estimated costs of restoration, and it's very easy for us to plug those in. Or there's a potential new feature there where we can allow the users to plug in their own numbers and estimate. And I guess you could also do that outside of the portal. So if you had your site here and you exported the condition categories for that site, it exports in Excel, and you can plug your own numbers in to the Excel and go from there. But yeah, we can update these layers or update these numbers or different models essentially from different sets of literature. But again, we've just used this one as it's it was quite established literature at the time of producing the platform.
Thanks, Carol. Question from Alex. How might one go about accessing the software? So the answer to that is, if you go to peatscope.com, you can access it. As we mentioned earlier, you'll have to register. There'll be a small delay while you get given access, but everyone is given access, and then you're ready to go. Second part of the question, do you envisage PeatSCOPE being used by landowners and managers such as crofters in a way that might help them decide whether or not to reach out for peatland restoration support? Absolutely. PeatSCOPE is there for landowners and land managers, for investors, and for policymakers. So the aim of PeatSCOPE is to give a single authoritative view onto all this data that can be shared by all. And so we'd certainly encourage landowners and land managers to access this data for deciding how you want to go forward with peatland restoration. The final part, or perhaps adjust their land management practices in a way as to limit impact on sensitive areas of peat. Absolutely. If you may well have additional uses for PeatSCOPE that we haven't thought of or wasn't part of the core remit. Love it. I mean, please use it. And if you have got innovative ways of using PeatSCOPE, please do let us know. We'd love to hear more from you. Question from Sarah: can CAD files be uploaded for an area, e.g. DWG?
I would have to check with the software development team on that one. I don't see why not. It might be a question to take offline. We can certainly get it in, but whether it's supported at the moment, I'm going to say no at the moment, but thanks for flagging it. That is, again, another use case. But yeah, if you want to contact me offline, I can certainly help make that into a format that's currently supported, and you can have a go with that. Okay.
Thanks, Carol. Okay, next question from Freddie. is the export of the layers within uploaded areas something that will be possible in the future? So this is I'm reading that as exporting the pixels and the spatial data, not just the stats. So as we covered earlier, stats you can export, pull out, and use as you wish. The pixels and the layers themselves at the moment are not exportable because we're wanting to keep the data within PeatSCOPE and keep it integrated. So at the moment, the full export of the layers is not possible. Question from Siawan. Was there or will information about areas of peatland, restored peat, restoration methods, or any future changes? So information about areas of restored peat, restoration method. So have we got any information about what's happened already? So I think in Steve's section, he talked about, I think it was approximately 65,000 hectares that have been restored already. Do we have any data on what's happened to date in the system? It looks like Caron's about to answer that question.
Yeah, so that falls into the areas of interest. There are a couple of available peatland action data sets available, and I've simply added those. So there's a couple here, peatland action feasibility studies and peatland action completed restoration footprints. So that's the only sort of concept we've got of it at the moment, are these completed restoration footprints that are listed by peatland action. So again, for these areas, you can look at the stats for those completed areas. We don't have sort of too much detailed information of sort of what restoration took place there, or yeah, we don't hold that detail. It's just a boundary, and that boundary allows you to look at the underlying data for that restoration site.
Thanks, Karen. I'm just conscious of time. We've got 5 minutes. We've got a few questions to go through, so we're going to sort of speed up a little bit. And question from Claire: can you talk us through the prioritization process? Has anybody got any thoughts on that?
I think it's the bottom link on the perspectives, just to talk through, Karen.
Yeah, thank you. So the prioritization perspective just lists all the layers together, so it allows you to turn them on and off on top of each other. In terms of prioritization, I guess the way you would do that in the portal is you'd have an area of interest that has a number of different boundaries, export that data, and then you can make your own decisions then based on the stats that have been exported. Certain sites have different percentages or hectareages of condition categories that are good for restoration, and also the co-benefits. So if you export them all together, which is kind of that allows you to do that in that prioritization piece, you can then again kind of outside of PeatSCOPE do that prioritization for certain sites in a spreadsheet.
Great, thanks, Carol. Question from Alex: are there any restrictions on sharing outputs from this? Please, I'd ask you check the terms and conditions, which are on the help section of the website. Question from Alan: I'm a PhD student. I want to use the data. What role do I register as? Any quick thoughts on that, Carol?
I'll just register as a policy role. The roles aren't too restrictive at the moment, so.
Thank you for that. Jack, what data set have you used for peatland condition?
Do you want me to cover that quickly?
Katie, yes, please.
So it's not an easy answer. First of all, we excluded all the areas that had nothing to do with peat: roads, rocks, rivers, streams, obvious grassland, etc., etc. Then we used the remote sensing algorithms to look at the presence of upland grasses that occur on bogs, such as Molinia, purple moorgrass, and looked at a heather indicator that we found was fairly successful, and we integrated those together with wetness and homogeneity, but every single biogeographical zone had to look at those in a different order. And it must be said here again, this is a prioritization portal. It does not give you products that are fit for a restoration to hand peatland code. That's a much more detailed and integrated mapping, and might give different results, but this is to get you started.
Thanks, Katie. I can see Karen's also starting to type answers to questions, so if any of the panelists are able to answer with typing, please feel free to. And I'm going to keep coming through. Regarding the potential, Abby, question from Abby, regarding the potential cost for users, do you have an estimate of cost of use, i.e. annual subscription? We have some rough ideas, but we're looking at the value first. So what we're looking to do at the moment is gather from users what the value of it is to understand the model before we get into the detail. Another question from Lucy. How much did you engage with landowners in the development process? Does anybody have any quick answers on that one?
Yeah, we engaged with a couple of landowners brought to us through a couple of our project partners. But what I will say is landowners were probably the group that we were the most difficult to sort of get hold of during the project process. So I would be very keen to sort of engage with more landowners sort of in the next month, if you can link me to some, that'd be brilliant.
Thank you, Carol. As only this question from Abby, only stats can be exported. Have you thought about how the tool can be used alongside other land use decision-making tools? We have happy to take that as a conversation offline. May not be able to sort of fully do justice to that today. Question from Lynn, will Registers of Scotland approach for information on data? Does anyone have a quick yes or no answer to that?
Top of my head, I'm going to say no.
Okay, so Registers of Scotland was super happy to have a conversation. It looks like we didn't connect with you. And a question from Freddie, will it be possible for a fee? I'm guessing that's linked to the exporting the layers, potentially, but that's part of the conversation of, and this is going to lead me on to the key two options as we wrap up here. Do we want to have core funded, free and open at the point of use, or do we want to have a pay-as-you-go model where market and government pays as you go? It's midday now. I'm very keen to wrap up and not take any more of your day. Thank you ever so much for engaging with us on the project process and also on the webinar today. Please do fill out the feedback form and the questionnaire that you may have received already. You certainly can receive more information on email after the close of this webinar. So thank you ever so much and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Goodbye all.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.